We are going to be talking a little bit about Linq queries, and Linq stands for Language Integrated Query. Basically, these Linq commands you're going to find in your controller. We are using C# to create them, but you could actually use any .NET Core language. Linq uses a derived context and an entity class. And then Entity Framework Core kind of passes along this query or representation of the Linq query to the database provider, which in our case is SQL Server. And the database provider then translates that Linq query into an actual SQL query that accesses our tables in our database. In order to use Linq, you do need to include using system.linq with your using statements. And when you are kind of formatting the query expression, you need a context object and a model class object. Then you need to basically call the method that you are executing. So the context option that we are going to be using is the private one that we've created up here. And if you remember, we set the private context equal to the public context. The public context includes information about the database provider. And now that you know that this query is Entity Framework actually sends it to the database provider, that probably makes a lot of sense. So you can see we have a constructor, and then we have a private constructor, and we're just setting the public information on the provider into the private, and we're using that private one throughout to execute the Linq commands. And so if you look down here, you can see here is that private context object calling movies, which is our class, or specifically it's our table. Okay, DB set took the movie entity or class, converted it into the movies table. Okay, so this is our actual table, and then here is the Linq command. And we're passing along ID, which is the primary key, which means it's going to retrieve 1. We're storing whatever gets retrieved, and we're passing it along to the view. So find is one of the commands that you can use with a Linq query. It's one of the most common commands. It's typically used in edits and deletions. And it basically finds the first occurrence. In this case, because we're using the primary key, there should only be one occurrence. Okay, so it's going to find the only occurrence, and it's going to retrieve it. And then if we look through here, so this is a post, which means they went into the edit, they made changes, and they submitted. So first thing it checks here is to make sure there's no errors. It's checking the model state, checking if it's valid. If a model state is not valid, that means there's errors. So as long as there's no errors, then if the movie ID is a 0, that means that it did not exist. And if you remember in a previous video, I said that it was going to use the edit view to add and edit. Okay, so if they're adding something that's new, there is not going to be an ID. And so you can see we're using that private context, we're using our table, and we're adding the movie data that we are receiving from the form. That is getting added to the database. If the movie ID has an actual value in it, okay, that indicates that it's an edit. And so instead of adding a movie, we are just simply going to update the movie. Okay? Now, these are both pending changes. So once you have kind of executed those or set those up, you have to use the context to save the changes. And that is what changes the database table. And then you can see that once we have done that, we are redirecting to the home controller and the index action method. Now that's all if the model state is valid. If there is an error, okay, then we are first determining, well, were they trying to add or were they trying to edit? Okay, and we're sending that action along to the view. And we're also sending all of the data that they entered. Okay, so that's what's going on when you post an edit. For delete, we have the get and the post as well. So with the delete, they need the ID, because without the ID, we're going to delete everything, which is kind of a problem. We're using the private context, movies, and we are finding that one occurrence because we are using the primary key, storing it in movie, passing that along to the view. So the view is, and we looked at that in the previous video, but all the view does is basically displays the name of the video and asks them if they want to delete or cancel. So if they truly chose delete, then it's going to run through the post. And so there's really nothing to check here. There is no validation in that view because either they're going to delete or cancel. So if they actually chose to delete, then we execute the remove command and we save the changes, and that row is removed from the table. And then we redirect them to the home controller index action method. Okay, and I should take a look here at the add, because both the add and the edit are going to the edit view. And how it is telling the difference between the two is it's checking the action. Okay, is it an add action or is it an edit? When they're adding, the action is set to add, and then you can see that we are rerouting to the edit view, and we're passing along a new movie object. Okay, with our edits, we are passing along an existing movie object, but this one is brand new because we're adding. Some additional methods that you actually cannot see in here. I'm going to pull this over, but you will see them in your controllers and you may use them. One is where. This is kind of similar to what we did in the home controller. Here we've got order by for sorting. Where is set up the same way. The difference, though, is that where is used to filter what is retrieved. Kind of like, you know, your regular SQL select statement, okay? Where is a filter so that instead of retrieving everything, you're limiting what you get back. You saw how order by works, and that is for sorting. first or default. So instead of order by, you'd have first or default followed by the lambda of what you're looking for. So that's going to return the first instance, or it's going to return null. Okay, so instead of a list, you're just going to get one. So that would be more similar to the find here, okay, where you're just going to have one. And I believe we have talked about everything else. Yep. So that is kind of in a nutshell, so far, what we know about our Linq queries. And as the course progresses, we are going to be learning and working with them more.